The wind carried the scent of dry earth and fading smoke across the lonely stretch of land. The sun hung low in the sky, bleeding orange over the jagged rocks and sparse bushes that dotted the desert floor. A single figure sat outside a small wooden cabin that looked as though it had been forgotten by time. The man's skin was weathered, his long dark hair streaked with gray. His eyes fixed on the horizon, as if waiting for something that would never come. His old rifle rested beside him, not out of fear but habit. He was an Apache, one of the few who had chosen solitude over surrender. For years he had lived in silence. Miles away from the nearest town, the war had taken his brothers. The white man's hunger for land had taken his people. And loneliness had taken whatever remained of his heart. The cabin was both his refuge and his prison, a place where ghosts whispered at night and memories refused to die. Each day passed the same way, the sound of wind, the creak of the rocking chair, and the quiet ache of a life half-lived. He spoke little, even to himself. The world had turned its back on him, and he had returned the favor. But that evening was different. The air felt strange, heavy with something unfamiliar. From the distance came the faint sound of footsteps crunching against dry soil. They were soft, uneven, hesitant. The man's hand instinctively reached for his rifle, his eyes narrowing toward the faint figure walking down the dusty trail. As the figure drew closer, he saw that it was a child, a little girl, barefoot, her dress torn, her hair tangled and clinging to her face. She couldn't have been older than 10. She stopped a few feet away, her small chest rising and falling with exhaustion. Her face was smudged with dirt, her lips cracked from thirst. She looked up at him, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Can I clean your house for a plate of food?" The man said nothing at first. He studied her, unsure if she was real or another trick of the desert heat. She waited, her eyes wide and pleading, clutching a small, ragged bundle in her hands. The silence between them stretched long, broken only by the sigh of the wind moving through the dry grass. He finally spoke, his voice deep and coarse from disuse. "Where's your home?" The girl looked down. "Don't have one no more." Something in her tone, so small, so final, cut through his hardened calm. He had seen many lost souls in his time, but never one this young wandering so far alone. Her skin was pale beneath the dust, her arms thin as sticks. Yet there was a spark of courage in her eyes that refused to fade. He didn't answer her question. Instead, he stood slowly, towering above her. She took a step back, fear flickering across her face, but he only walked toward the door, opened it, and gestured her inside. "Come." The girl hesitated before stepping in. The cabin was dark and simpler, a small bed, a wooden table, a pot hanging over dying coals. Everything smelled faintly of smoke and leather. The man moved without speaking, pulling down a small tin plate from the shelf. He ladled a scoop of stew into it, thick and warm. The girl's eyes lit up as he placed it before her. She muttered a quiet thank you and began to eat slowly. Almost reverently, as if afraid the food might disappear, he watched her in silence. Every motion she made stirred memories he had buried long ago of his sister. His mother, the sound of laughter before the soldiers came. He turned away, sitting back in his chair, staring into the fading firelight. After a while, the girl spoke again, her voice small but steady. "You live here all by yourself?" "Yes." "Don't you get lonely?" He didn't reply. Loneliness had become as natural to him as breathing. It was not something he fought anymore. It simply existed, like the dust and the silence. She took another bite before whispering. "My mama used to say lonely people talk to the wind. Do you talk to it too?" He almost smiled but didn't. The wind doesn't answer. Her eyes wandered over the small room, noticing the careful order of things, the cleaned rifle, the folded blanket, the knife sharpened to a perfect edge. "You keep your house clean," she said. "Guess you don't need me to clean it after all." The man leaned forward, studying her face. "Why were you walking out there alone?" The girl hesitated, her spoon pausing halfway to her mouth. "I was looking for my mama." He felt his chest tighten. "And where is she?" The little girl looked at the fire, her voice barely a whisper. "She told me to wait by the road while she went to find help. But she didn't come back." The man's jaw tightened, his gaze turning to the window where night had begun to settle. Coyotes howled in the distance. The girl continued to eat, her small hands trembling from the chill creeping through the walls. He said nothing more, though the silence between them seemed to fill the room with questions neither wanted to ask after she finished. She stood, unsure what to do next. "I can sweep or wash dishes," she offered softly. "I'm good at cleaning." He looked at her again, this child, with nothing but a torn dress and a stubborn heart, and something deep inside him shifted. "You'll sleep here tonight," he said finally. "We'll see about cleaning tomorrow." She nodded quickly, relief flashing across her face. He gave her his blanket, spreading it on the floor near the fire. As she lay down, her eyes heavy with sleep, she whispered, "Thank you." He turned away, staring into the flames. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of another heartbeat close to his own. It unsettled him, reminding him of things he had long buried: trust, compassion, the quiet ache of caring. The desert had taken much from him, but it had never taken his instinct to protect. Still, he knew better than to hope. Outside, the wind grew stronger, carrying the sound of hooves faint in the distance. The Apache stiffened, his instincts sharpening. No one came this far without reason. He stepped outside, the cold air biting against his skin. The moonlight spilled over the land, revealing nothing but dust and silence. Yet the feeling in his chest told him trouble was near. He returned to the cabin, checked the rifle, and sat near the door. The little girl slept peacefully, her small hand clutching the edge of the blanket. He watched her for a long time, wondering who she really was and what kind of danger might follow her. The fire crackled, throwing shifting shadows across the walls. In one of them, he thought he saw a shape, a woman's outline, fleeting as smoke. He blinked, and it was gone. The wind outside whispered again, low and uneasy, as if warning him. He leaned back in his chair, eyes never leaving the door. The girl murmured something in her sleep, her voice soft, but filled with fear. He couldn't make out the words, but they chilled him all the same. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a dog barked once and went silent. The night held its breath. The man's hand gripped the rifle tighter. Whoever or whatever had left that child alone in the desert was not finished yet. And as the fire burned lower, the old Apache knew the quiet life he had built in the forgotten corner of the world was about to end. The night stretched long and restless. The fire's glow had faded to soft embers, leaving the cabin dim, except for the thin line of moonlight slipping through the cracks in the wall. The old Apache sat in silence, his rifle across his knees, listening to the faint rhythm of the girl's breathing. Every sound outside made his muscles tense: the shifting wind, the rustle of dry grass, the distant echo of a coyote. He had lived too long in this land not to know when something was off. The desert was quiet, yes, but this kind of quiet carried weight. It was the kind that came before something happened. He didn't sleep that night. His thoughts wandered instead, tracing back to the road that had led him here. Long ago, this same land had been filled with the laughter of children, the songs of his people carried on the wind. He had been young then, proud, certain that the land would always belong to them. But the world had changed. The soldiers came first, then the settlers, then the railroad that cut through the hills like a scar. Each brought promises and took pieces of what had once been sacred. When the fighting ended, nothing was the same. The tribes scattered. The survivors carried their pain into the mountains or the empty plains, and he had come here to forget, to disappear. Now, sitting in his quiet exile, he found himself staring at a sleeping child, her face soft in the flickering light. She was a reminder of everything he had tried to bury. He didn't know her story, but he could feel the weight of it pressing against the silence. There was loss in her eyes, the kind that didn't come from a short life, but from one that had already seen too much. When dawn broke, it came pale and thin, washing the desert in cold gold. The girl stirred, rubbing her eyes. She blinked at the sight of him still sitting near the door. "You didn't sleep," she said softly. "Didn't need to," he replied. She stood, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders, glancing toward the window. "Do you think my mama will come?" He didn't answer right away. He wasn't a man who lied, and he wasn't sure what truth would do to her. "If she can," he said finally, his voice steady but low. "But you'll stay here until we know." The girl nodded, though her eyes clouded with worry. She said she'd come back for me. She always does. He studied her closely. What's your name? Lena, she said, after a pause. And yours? He hesitated, as if the name belonged to another lifetime. They used to call me Red Hawk. Used to. She asked, tilting her head. I don't need names here, he said simply. She accepted that, as children often do, and began to look around the cabin again. I can fetch water, she offered, if you show me where. He pointed toward the narrow stream that wound through the rocks 1/2 mile north. Follow the stones. Don't go past the oak tree. Lena nodded and took the old tin pail from near the door. He watched her go, her small figure vanishing into the light. He felt uneasy letting her out of sight, but something told him she needed to move, to feel useful, to believe she still had a purpose in this wide, empty land. As he stepped outside, the morning wind carried the faint sound of hooves again, distant but real this time. He looked toward the ridge, eyes narrowing. No dust trail, no riders visible yet, but someone had been near. His hand brushed the worn handle of the rifle as he scanned the open desert. Then, quietly, he turned back inside. Lena returned after. A while, carrying the pail with both hands, her face flushed from the walk. I heard something, she said. Like horses. He nodded slowly. You hear good? She looked uneasy. Is someone coming? Maybe, he said, not wanting to frighten her more. But not yet. As the day went on, the girl helped. Him with small things sweeping dust from the corners, washing dishes, folding blankets. She hummed softly while she worked, a broken little tune that reminded him of songs once sung around the fire at night. It was strange how quickly her presence began to change the air inside that lonely cabin, where there had been only silence. Now there was movement, the small sounds of life creeping back in. Still, the feeling of danger lingered. He found tracks later near the stream fresh from at least 3 horses. Not soldiers, he thought, but travelers. The marks were sharp, disciplined, not the kind made by wanderers or drifters. Whoever they were, they had passed close, too close. He brushed the prints over with dirt and went back before Lena noticed. That evening, as the sun began to fall behind the cliffs, the two of them sat outside the cabin. The girl leaned against the step, clutching a small wooden carving he had. Given her a hawk he had whittled years ago, its wings spread wide. Did you make this? She asked. Yes, he said quietly. It's beautiful. You must have been happy when you made it. He didn't answer. The truth was, he had carved it on the night his brother died. When he needed something to keep his hands busy and his heart from breaking. But the memory was not one he would share. Instead, he asked her gently, Where were you before you came here? Lena hesitated. We were traveling, she said slowly. Mama said we were going to find a place called Prescott. She said folks there were kind. But our wagon broke, and the man we were traveling with took the horse and left. Did your mother say his name? She shook her head. She just said not to trust him. He frowned, turning that over in his mind. Prescott was a few days' ride from here to far, for a child to have walked alone. Whatever had happened on that road wasn't just misfortune. Someone had left them stranded, maybe worse. Do you remember what he looked like? He asked. Big man, she said softly. Beard. He had a scar on his neck and always looked over his shoulder like someone was following him. Red Hawk's jaw tightened. He knew that type runaway men, deserters, thieves trying to outrun their past. The desert was full of them. When night came again, he built the fire higher than before. The cold crept in early, sharp and biting. Lena sat close to the flames, her eyes wide as she listened to the night sounds. Do you think bad people are out there? She asked. Always, he said. But the land keeps its secrets. She looked up at him with quiet trust. You'll keep me safe, he paused before answering. As long as you're here? The words settled between them, a promise he hadn't meant to make, but couldn't take back. Later, after she had fallen asleep, he stepped outside again. The moon hung low, bright and heavy. From the ridge, a faint flicker of light caught his eye firelight, maybe from a camp. His pulse quickened. Whoever they were watching this stretch of land. He stayed there for hours, the cold biting through his coat until the light faded. When he finally went inside, he sat beside the door once more, his rifle ready. He had survived raids, wars, betrayals. He knew danger when it came creeping in the dark. And now, for the first time in years, it wasn't only his life he had to protect. At dawn, Lena woke to find him still there. She blinked sleepily, her voice soft. "You look tired." He gave a small nod. "You'll stay inside today," he said. "Don't go to the stream." She frowned. Why did something happen? He didn't explain. Just stay close. The day passed slower than usual. He checked the ridge again and again, scanning for movement. Each time, the desert looked empty, but the unease refused to fade. Lena sensed it too. Her usual chatter quieted, and she stayed close to the cabin, helping where she could. By late afternoon, clouds began to roll in, dark and heavy, bringing the scent of rain. The air grew cool, carrying the sound of thunder far in the distance. Red Hawk gathered wood, watching the horizon. And then, through the blur of dust and shadow, he saw 3 riders moving along the ridge. Keeping their distance, he said nothing, only stepped back inside and closed the door. Lena looked at him, sensing the change. "They're coming, aren't they?" She whispered. He met her eyes, calm but alert. "Maybe," he said, "but they'll find what they're not looking for if they do." That night the storm broke hard, wind whipping against the cabin, rain slapping the windows. The fire roared in the hearth, throwing restless shadows across the walls. The sound of hooves echoed faintly through the storm, closer now, muffled but clear. Lena clutched the wooden hawk to her chest, her voice trembling. "I hear them." He moved to the door, checking the latch, his hand steady on the rifle. "Stay by the fire," he said. Outside, the wind howled through the valley, carrying voices low, rough, calling to each other through the rain. They were searching. The old Apache took a slow breath, his eyes sharp as steel. The quiet years were gone now, swept away by the storm, and as thunder rolled across the sky, he knew the next knock on that door would change both their lives forever. The storm raged. Deep into the night, wind clawing at the cabin walls and rain hammering against the roof. Each crash of thunder lit the desert like a battlefield, and each flash revealed shadows moving along the ridge. The old Apache kept his rifle close, every instinct alert. The girl sat by the fire, hugging her knees, eyes wide as lightning danced outside. She didn't speak, and he didn't ask her to. Sometimes silence was safer than words. When the rain eased for a moment, he slipped outside, moving low along the edge of the cabin. The ground was slick, the air heavy with the scent of wet dust and pine. He saw the faint glow of a campfire far off near the ridge small. Controlled, the kind that belonged to men who didn't want to be seen. He crouched, watching. Through the wind he caught a sound, rough laughter carried across the night. There were 3 of them, maybe 4, their horses tied beneath a rock ledge. He stayed long enough to be certain they were not travelers. The way they moved told him they were hunting for something or someone. When he returned to the cabin, Lena was still awake. "You went out there," she said, her voice small but steady. "You saw them, didn't you?" He nodded, shaking the rain from his coat. "They'll wait till daylight. Men like that don't fight the dark." "Are they looking for me?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Her question hit too close to the truth he was already thinking. "Maybe," he said finally. "Or maybe they're just lost." But both of them knew they weren't. Morning came gray and cold. The rain had stopped, but the ground was soft, the sky low and heavy. Red Hawk built a small fire outside to mask the smell of smoke from the night before. He moved carefully, every motion deliberate. Lena helped by gathering dry wood, though she kept glancing toward the hills. The fear in her eyes wasn't just for herself anymore, it was for him too. After breakfast, he checked the rifle and a small pistol that hadn't been fired in years. The metal was old, but solid, like him. He slipped the pistol into a leather pouch and looked toward the north trail. That was where the riders had been. He turned to Lena. "If I don't come back by nightfall, you stay hidden in the cellar." Her eyes widened. "You're going after them?" He didn't answer directly. "If they find this place, I need to know what they want before they get here. But what if they hurt you? His gaze softened for a moment. I've been hurt before. She wanted to say more, but he was already gone. The desert had a way of holding secrets. He moved quietly along the edge of the ridge, following the faint trail of hoofprints. The men had broken camp early, heading east. He followed until he heard their voices again, low and impatient. He crept closer, crouching behind a line of rocks. 3 men, as he'd guessed. One tall, with a red coat and a heavy beard, the same type Lena had described. Another thin and nervous-looking, his eyes darting around. The third was younger, his face half hidden under a hat. They were arguing over something. You said the woman had the money, the tall one growled. So where is she? I told you. She went off toward the canyon, the thin man stammered. Said she'd come back for the girl. The younger one kicked at the ground. She ain't coming back. You saw what happened. The tall man scowled, pulling at his beard. Then the kid knows where it is. We find her. We find the gold. Red Hawk's stomach tightened. So that was it. Not revenge. Not justice greed. It was always greed. He stayed low, watching as the men mounted their horses again. Heading straight toward the south trail, the one that led directly to his cabin. He turned back fast, keeping to the rocks and brush. By the time he reached home, Lena was waiting by the door. Worry written all over her face. They're coming, he said. Her voice trembled. They're the same ones who left us. He nodded once. You told me your mother went for help. Do you know where she went? Lena hesitated, biting her lip. She said there was a cabin with smoke in the distance, and she'd come back after she talked to the man there. He froze. Smoke. That could have been his fire. But he had seen no one that day. No woman, no stranger. When was that? 2 days before I found you? A cold chill moved through him. If her mother had come this way, the desert had swallowed her whole. And if the men knew that, they weren't just looking for gold, they were trying to silence what was left of the truth. He handed her the small pistol. If you hear anything, you hide and don't come out unless it's me. Lena's hand shook as she took it. I don't know how to use this. Point and pull, he said. Only if you have to. She nodded, her small face set with determination that didn't belong to a child her age. By midday, the riders were close. He could see the dust trail rising in the distance. He waited behind the barn, rifle steady, eyes fixed on the road. They came slowly, cautious, their horses snorting at the smell of smoke. The tall man dismounted first, scanning the area. Someone's been living here, he said. Fire's still warm? Think it's the girl? The younger one asked. Could be, the tall man said. Could be the man who took her in. Red Hawk listened, his breath quiet and even. He knew this kind of man-drifters who hunted what didn't belong to them, feeding on the weak. He wasn't about to let them take what little piece he had left. Then one of them shouted. Tracks? Small one's kid's feet. The tall man smiled, dark and sharp. We've got her. Before they could move farther, Red Hawk stepped out from behind the barn. You're on the wrong land, he said, voice cold as stone. All 3 turned, startled. The tall one grinned. Well, look what we've got here. Didn't expect company way out here? This place isn't for you, Red Hawk said. Turn around. The man laughed. Now that ain't friendly. We're just looking for a little girl. You seen her? Red Hawk didn't move. She's gone. Gone. The man's eyes narrowed. You sure about that? I'm sure you don't belong here. For a moment, no one spoke. The younger one shifted nervously, his hand brushing the handle of his gun. The tall man smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. You look like you've seen your share of fights, old man. But there's 3 of us and 1 of you. Then 3 will fall, Red Hawk said quietly. The silence broke like a whip. The tall man's grin faded, and tension snapped through the air. Then a voice came from inside the cabin's mall, frightened. Red Hawk. The tall man's eyes lit up. Well, I'll be damned. She is here. Red Hawk turned fast, shouting, Stay inside. But it was too late. The men rushed forward and gunfire shattered the quiet. The sound echoed through the canyon like thunder. When the smoke cleared, 2 of the men had fallen back, one clutching his arm, the other scrambling for cover. Red Hawk ducked behind a water trough, his rifle reloading fast. The tall man fired again, the bullet splintering wood inches from his head. Inside, Lena hid under the table, trembling, the pistol clutched tight. She could hear the chaos outside, the shouts, the sound of boots pounding against wet ground. Every instinct told her to stay still, but then she saw it, a shadow moving toward the back door. One of the men had slipped away. She froze, heart hammering. The latch moved, slow and careful. She raised the pistol, hand shaking, her breath shallow. Outside, Red Hawk saw the movement at the cabin and knew what it meant. He fired a warning shot, but the wind swallowed the sound. He couldn't reach her in time. Inside, the door creaked open. The man stepped through, mud dripping from his boots, his eyes scanning the room. "There you are," he whispered. "You've caused a lot of trouble, little one." Lena swallowed hard, her finger tightening on the trigger. She remembered Red Hawk's words. Point and pull. The shot rang out, deafening in the small space. Outside, Red Hawk turned, his chest tightening. The sound had come from inside. He ran to the door, kicking it open. The man lay still on the floor, and Lena stood frozen, tears streaking down her face. The pistol still trembling in her hands. He took it gently from her and set it aside. "You did what you had to," he said softly, but his words didn't ease the weight in his chest. He looked outside again. The tall man was gone, and the younger one with him. The storm had passed, but a darker one was coming. Lena looked up at him, eyes wide with fear. Will they come back? He stared at the empty road, the wind picking up again across the plain. "Yes," he said. "They will." The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. The wind whispered through the trees as night fell again, colder now, sharper. Red Hawk and Lena moved quietly inside the cabin, the fire low, casting long, jittering shadows across the walls. Outside, the desert was a black void, punctuated only by the faint glimmer of distant stars. Every sound was magnified, the creak of the cabin boards, the scuttle of a lizard on the porch, the rustle of dry leaves in the wind. Red Hawk's hands never left his weapons. His eyes constantly scanned the dark. Lena sat near the hearth, hugging herself, the memory of the pistol in her small hands still fresh in her mind. "Are they really coming back?" she asked softly, voice barely louder than the crackle of the fire. "They're already close," Red Hawk said. His voice was calm, but the muscles in his jaw were tight. "They've been waiting, watching. They're patient, and so are we." She shivered, rubbing her arms. "Why do they want me so badly?" He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "It isn't just about you. It's about what you know, and what they want from your mother. They've been chasing it for a long time." Lena's eyes widened. Do they know where she is?" Red Hawk shook his head. "No, but that doesn't make them less dangerous." The night passed in tense quiet, interrupted only by distant howls and the occasional roll of thunder. He checked the perimeter, listening to the soft crunch of horses in the distance. The riders were circling, testing the boundaries of his land, waiting for a mistake. He could feel it in his bones they were hunters. He and Lena were prey. By morning, clouds had rolled in again, thick and gray. Rain threatened, making the desert smell of wet stone and earth. Red Hawk used the cover to scout the surrounding hills, noting the tracks of horses fresh, scattered, cautious. The riders were close, but they had not yet found a direct path to the cabin. It gave him a moment, brief but precious, to prepare. He spent the day reinforcing weak points around the cabin. The cellar was stocked with blankets and food, a hidden space where Lena could hide if they came too close. He set traps simple, crude, but enough to slow intruders and give him warning. Lena watched him work, helping where she could. Her small hands carried supplies, swept floors, and fetched water, her eyes flicking toward the hills with every sound. Hours passed, stretching longer than they should. Red Hawk had grown used to solitude, and having a child in his cabin was a strange kind of responsibility, heavy but grounding. He found himself studying her, noticing her courage, even in fear, the way her eyes tried to stay steady when he wasn't looking. She reminded him of a world he had once loved, one before loss and war had stripped everything away. Even so, the shadow of the men loomed over them. Red Hawk's instincts were honed by decades of survival, and every sense told him that the next strike would come swiftly and without warning. He thought about the stories of the Apache before him, about the battles, fought not just with rifles, but with wit, patience, and courage. He would need all of that and more. As dusk approached, the first signs of movement appeared. Shadows slipped along the ridges, careful, almost deliberate. He crouched low near the back window, rifle ready. 3 figures, mounted and quiet, were advancing, scanning the terrain. One dismounted near a cluster of rocks, crouching low, as if listening. The others circled slowly, moving to cut off any escape. Red Hawk's heart thudded. They were closing in, and soon there would be no room for mistakes. He glanced at Lena, who had hidden herself in the cellar as instructed. She peered out from beneath a blanket, clutching her wooden hawk, small talisman against the fear that gripped her. "Stay calm," he whispered under his breath. "Stay quiet. Wait for me." The men moved closer, unaware that they were being watched from a vantage point Red Hawk had chosen carefully. He could see their faces now, the tall one with the red coat and scar, the thin one nervously adjusting his gun, and the younger with the hat shadowing his eyes. Their intent was clear. They were not here for conversation. They were here to claim what they believed belonged to them, and they would not leave empty-handed suddenly. A branch snapped under the foot of one of the riders. Red Hawk froze, holding his breath. The man turned, scanning, eyes sharp, lips curling into a grin. "I know you're here," he called out. "Come out and face us." Red Hawk didn't move. He waited, knowing that every second counted. He could feel the tension in the air, thick and electric. Every sound from the desert, the distant rumble of thunder, the whisper of the wind, the creak of his own cabin felt amplified, as if the land itself were holding its breath. Inside, Lena squeezed her wooden hawk tighter. She could hear the voices, the heavy boots on wet earth. She understood, even without seeing, that the danger was imminent. Her small body trembled, but her mind raced with thoughts of her mother, of Red Hawk, of survival. She had already faced abandonment once. She would not do it again. Outside, Red Hawk shifted, his rifle rising to his shoulder. The tall man called out again, more forcefully this time. "You can't hide from us forever, old man. You and the girl belong to us." Red Hawk's finger hovered near the trigger. He didn't respond. He waited for the right moment, the moment when the advantage could turn the fight in his favor. Years of living in the desert had taught him patience. Patience was now his greatest weapon. The men moved forward, their confidence growing, unaware that the land itself was against them. A hidden wire snapped under one horse's hoof, tipping a tin can that clattered loudly. The sound echoed, sharp and unnatural. The men stopped, startled, scanning the shadows. Red Hawk took note, eyes narrowing. They were cautious now, but hesitation could be fleeting. Hours seemed to stretch into eternity. The rain began again, fine and steady, soaking the ground and chilling the air. Red Hawk remained still, rifle steady, observing every movement. Each shadow could be a threat, each sound a signal of an ambush. He thought about the girl in the cellar, her small hands ready, her courage growing with each passing hour. She was learning the rules of survival by necessity, and he had to ensure that what she learned kept her alive as the storm raged outside. A flicker of movement caught his Aja rider trying to flank the cabin from the east. Red Hawk's jaw tightened. They were testing him, probing for weakness. The battle was coming, whether he wanted it or not. Inside, Lena heard the distant shouts, the splash of horses' hooves in puddles, the metallic scrape of guns against saddles. Fear threatened to overwhelm her, but she forced herself to stay focused. Red Hawk had taught her that panic was more dangerous than any enemy. She clutched her wooden hawk and whispered a prayer under her breath. The only weapon she had besides her courage. The tall man called out once more, his voice cutting through the storm. "We know you're in there. Come out. You can't hide forever." Red Hawk's eyes scanned the ridge one last time. He knew the next few minutes would decide everything: who survived, who fell, and whether Lena's mother's secrets would remain safe. His finger tightened on the trigger, his breath steady despite the pounding in his chest. The men were bold now, reckless even. And that could be their undoing. Lightning struck close, illuminating the ridge and the approaching riders. Red Hawk's eyes caught the flash, taking note of every detail at the position of their horses, the weight of their weapons, the tension in their muscles. He whispered to himself soon. The wind howled, the rain poured, and the desert seemed to close in around them. Shadows danced across the cabin walls, echoing the chaos that was about to erupt. Inside, Lena held her breath, waiting, knowing that the world she had just begun to trust was about to be tested in ways she could not yet imagine. And somewhere in the distance, a lone coyote howled, as if warning the desert itself that the storm was about to reach its peak. The moment was on the edge of breaking. The calm before the fight that would change everything. Every sense, every nerve, every instinct told Red Hawk that the climax of this danger was near. And when it came, there would be no turning back. The night waited, heavy and expectant. And the desert held its breath along with them. The first shot cracked the night, sharp and sudden, echoing off the cliffs like a warning. Red Hawk had waited, knowing the men's impatience would be their weakness. He fired again, and the tall man yelped as the bullet tore through his coat, grazing his shoulder. The other two froze, startled by the sudden violence. And Red Hawk used the moment to move fast, disappearing into the shadows and circling behind them. Inside the cabin, Lena held her breath, listening to the chaos. She could hear Red Hawk's movements outside, the thud of boots in the wet earth, the grunts and curses of the men who had thought themselves unstoppable. Her small hands gripped the wooden hawk tighter, her heart hammering in rhythm with the storm outside. She remembered his words, "Stay calm, wait for the right moment," and she did. She waited, knowing that every second counted, and that the desert had a way of deciding who survived. Red Hawk emerged from his cover, rifle raised, and the younger man's eyes widened. "He's alone," he whispered, disbelief breaking into panic. "There's just one of him." "You think that scares me?" the thin man said, voice shaky. Red Hawk didn't answer. He fired again, the bullet forcing the younger man to dive behind a boulder. The tall man tried to advance, dragging himself on one knee, but the rain-slick ground betrayed him. Red Hawk moved silently like a shadow, closing the distance. Within moments, the tall man was disarmed and pinned, the fight draining from his body faster than he could understand. The thin man tried to escape, but Red Hawk was faster, tackling him to the ground with a strength that belied his years. The three men were subdued, the threat neutralized for now. The rain continued to fall, washing the desert clean, and for the first time in days, the land felt quiet. Inside the cabin, Lena peeked out, eyes wide. Red Hawk had returned, soaked but steady, his rifle slung over his shoulder. He smiled faintly at her, a small acknowledgement that the danger had passed, at least for the moment. "Come out," he said, voice calm. "It's over for now." Lena ran to him, tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. "You did it," she whispered, relief flooding through her small frame. Red Hawk knelt and pulled her close. "We did it," he corrected softly. "Together." Once inside, they lit a new fire and began to dry off. The cabin smelled of smoke and wet earth, but also of safety, if only temporary. Red Hawk cleaned his weapons while Lena fetched blankets, helping where she could. He watched her work, noting how quickly she had adapted to the rules of survival. She was brave. She had learned much in a short time, enough to remind him that courage came in many forms. The three men had been tied up and hidden in the cellar. Red Hawk didn't trust them, but he also knew the law could handle the rest. He planned to take them to the nearest settlement at first light, where justice could be delivered properly. There was no satisfaction in personal vengeance. Survival and protection were enough. As the storm cleared, the sky opened up to reveal stars shining through the dissipating clouds. The air was crisp, and the desert smelled of wet stone and fresh earth. Red Hawk stepped outside, letting Lena follow. They looked toward the horizon, where the sun was just beginning to rise, painting the land in gold and orange. The desert stretched vast and open before them, a reminder of the solitude that had once been his only companion. "You're safe now," Lena said, her voice filled with wonder. "Yes," he said, though his eyes remained on the distant hills. But this land? It always has its dangers. You can't forget that. Shh. She nodded. I won't. He looked down at her and saw the spark of hope that had been buried beneath fear. She was small, but her spirit was strong. In her, he saw resilience, a reminder that even in a world full of loss and hardship, life could endure and grow. They spent the next hours preparing for the journey to town. Red Hawk packed essential supplies, while Lena helped gather food and blankets. Each item was carefully chosen, each step deliberate. The desert had taught him patience, and he taught it to her now. They moved together, a small unit forged by circumstance, trust, and necessity. Before leaving, Red Hawk knelt and spoke to Lena. Whatever happens from here, remember this. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward, even when fear is there. You showed me that. Never forget it. She nodded solemnly, gripping his hand. I won't. The journey to the settlement was long, the terrain rough, but uneventful compared to what they had faced. Red Hawk kept his senses sharp, eyes scanning the horizon for signs of trouble. Lena walked close, occasionally asking questions about the land, the animals, and the stars. Red Hawk answered in measured tones, sharing wisdom shaped by years of living off the desert, teaching her not just survival, but respect for the land and its rhythms. When they arrived, the settlement was bustling, dusty streets filled with wagon wheels, livestock, and the chatter of townsfolk. Red Hawk led Lena to the sheriff's office, explaining the situation. The three men were taken into custody, their greed and threats rendered powerless against the law. Lena watched quietly, understanding that justice had a place, even if it moved slowly. Later, as they walked back to the edge of town, Red Hawk paused. You'll need a home, somewhere safe, he said, and a place where people care about you. Lena looked up at him, eyes bright. Do you have a home? He shook his head, faint sadness in his gaze. Not anymore. But maybe we can find one together. They walked in silence for a while, the weight of the past days pressing down, but softened by the warmth of survival and hope. The sun hung high now, the desert alive with color and sound. Birds called overhead, the wind danced through the trees, and the land seemed to promise new beginnings. Red Hawk thought about the years he had spent alone, about the loss he had endured, and about the unexpected arrival of a little girl who had changed everything. Lena had brought life back into the cabin, laughter back into his days, and a sense of purpose he hadn't known he still possessed. She was a reminder that even in a world full of hardships, connections could form, trust could grow, and courage could flourish. Lena looked around the desert, her eyes wide with wonder. It's so big, she whispered. Yes, Red Hawk said, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. And it's ours to walk, carefully, wisely, and with respect. You've learned that already. As they returned to the cabin, Red Hawk felt a sense of calm settle over him for the first time in years. The storm had passed, the danger had been faced, and though the desert would always carry its challenges, they had survived, together, that night. Lena slept soundly near the fire, the wooden hawk tucked under her arm. Red Hawk sat in the rocking chair, staring into the flames, reflecting on what had happened. He thought of the men who had come, the dangers they had faced, and the courage the little girl had shown. He realized that protection and survival were not just acts of strength, but acts of love, patience, and teaching. The desert outside was quiet now, the stars shining brilliantly, the wind carrying the faint scent of earth and renewal. He knew there would be other challenges in the days to come, but for the first time. He also knew that he would not face them alone. In the early morning, he stepped outside with Lena. They stood together, looking out over the vast landscape, the sunrise painting everything in warm gold. The desert was still alive and full of possibility. You're not alone anymore, Lena said softly, glancing up at him. No, Red Hawk replied, voice quiet but steady. And neither are you. They turned toward the cabin, the fire of their small refuge waiting for them, a symbol of survival, trust, and new beginnings. The Apache had found a reason to keep living, and Lena had found safety and hope. Together, they would face whatever came next, guided by courage, wisdom, and the quiet strength that comes from standing side by side with someone who cares. And in the silence of the desert, a hawk cried in the distance, wings stretched wide, a reminder that even in the harshest land, life and hope endure. The storm had passed. The danger had been faced. And though the desert would always hold its mysteries, for now, the cabin was a place of safety, courage, and a promise of a future that had once seemed impossible. Red Hawk and Lena stepped inside, closing the door behind them. For the first time in a long while, the world felt steady. Though the horizon still held uncertainty, they were ready to face it together. The little girl who had asked for a plate of food had changed his life. And the old Apache who had once lived only in shadows had found a spark of light he thought had long been gone. The desert whispered around them, quiet and patient. And in that quiet, they both knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together and they would endure.